You never realize you're in a war story until the war becomes personal. Until the man next to you is someone you've trained with, laughed with, and now he's bleeding out on the floor of a helicopter that's falling from the sky. My name is Ryan Harlow, and I should have died in Mogadishu, but fate had other plans. It was October 3rd, 1993. I was a sniper with Task Force Ranger. Our objective that day, capture a group of top warlords meeting in a stronghold at the heart of the city. A simple mission, they told us. Quick in, quick out. They always say that. I was on Super 6-2 with two legends, Colt Barrett and Eli Marston. Quiet guys, focused, the kind who didn't talk about dying because they'd already made peace with it. We were flying Overwatch when we heard the first call. Super 6-1 is hit. Then a second voice, urgent, broken. Bird down, bird down, bird down. Smoke rose like a flare into the chaos. Rangers scrambled below. Rounds snapped past the rotors. The city was turning into a maze of gunfire and bad decisions. Then Colt looked at me. Just one look. No words. He and Eli volunteered to fast rope in to protect the downed crew of Super 6-1. I watched them slide down the ropes into a crowd of shadows and rifles. That was the last time I saw them alive. A moment later, our bird was hit. An RPG tore through the floor, took my leg with it. I was holding a belt around my thigh and a screwdriver in my hand, trying to stay conscious, trying not to bleed out, trying not to die. You don't really know what kind of soldier you are until the only weapon you've got left is your heartbeat. That day broke something in me and built something stronger in its place. Before Mogadishu, my war was quiet. It was training ranges in North Carolina, static lines and sand tables, sweat, blood, repetition. I'd served with 7th Group in Central America, then spent time in Germany under a covert cell designed for Cold War contingencies. We trained to fight a war that never came. But Somalia? That was real, raw, and totally unpredictable. In the summer of '93, the UN mission in Somalia had started to unravel. A famine was tearing the country apart, and a warlord named Jibril Aden, an ex-militia commander trained by the Soviets, was hijacking aid convoys, slaughtering peacekeepers, and consolidating power in the capital. After his militia butchered 24 Pakistani peacekeepers, the US formed Task Force Ranger, Delta Rangers, Night Stalkers, and us, snipers, surgical, invisible. We operated out of a hangar at the Mogadishu airfield. It was a skeleton setup. Cots, radios, stacks of MREs and ammo. I bunked next to Colt Barrett, the best shot I've ever known. And across from us, Eli Marston, calm as a monk, deadly with the M21. There was no Netflix, no internet, only journals and banter and the constant dry heat pressing in through every crack in the walls. We lived in a state of edge. Half of us hoping for action, the other half praying the mission would get called off. I remember September 26. We just finished a dawn recon op, and I was cleaning my rifle when word came down. Intel had eyes on Aden's top lieutenants, scheduled to meet in a building near Bukhara Market. We started rehearsing. Rangers would hit the target building. Delta would clear and snatch the HVTs. Convoy on standby. Sniper birds in Overwatch. This wasn't our first raid, but something felt off. The target site was in the heart of enemy territory. Too open, too visible, and the enemy, Aden's militia, the SAF, knew we'd come eventually. Still, we went, because that's what we do. We knew the risk. Every man nodded when the plan was briefed, every hand gripped gear tighter that morning. I remember Colt slipping a photo of his daughter into his chest pocket, Eli checking his scope one last time, and me tucking a small leather journal into my cargo pouch. That was the morning of October 3rd, our last morning before the fall. You never know when the ordinary becomes history. But in Mogadishu, you feel it in the air before the first bullet ever leaves the barrel. October 3rd, 1993. The mission kicked off at exactly 1542. We were airborne in 2 Black Hawks, circling the Bukhara Market like hawks, Super 6-1 and Super 6-2. I was on 6-2, wedged between Colt Barrett and Eli Marston, rifles braced across our knees. The heat inside that bird was suffocating, not just from the sun, but from something else, a weight in the air, an intuition that no amount of training could shake. Colt cracked a joke about the smell of goat stew drifting up from the city. Eli didn't laugh, neither did I. On the street, Rangers were already fast roping in. Delta moved fast, breached the target buildings, snatched the lieutenants. No shots yet. It looked clean. Then we heard the call. Blackburn is down. One of the Rangers, Private First Class Tommy Blackburn, had missed the rope and fallen 60 feet. Suddenly, the whole tempo shifted. A rescue element was scrambled. Convoy rerouted. We could hear it all over comms, shouting, overlapping commands. The rhythm of the operation, cracking. Then came the first gunfire, light, sporadic, but close, like a warning. We orbited tighter. My eyes scanned alleys and rooftops, nothing, but that didn't mean it was clear. Below us, the Rangers began loading the detainees onto Humvees. Delta was holding the perimeter. Convoy was set to roll. Then pop, 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 gunfire erupted in every direction. It was like the whole city turned on. Shutters flew open. Men in sandals with AKs poured into the streets. The SAF militia had come alive, and they weren't disorganized. This was a coordinated ambush. Our birds tilted hard as we repositioned. Eli was already calling out targets to Colt. Both began taking sniper shots from the air, controlled, precise. Hit on the north stairwell, Colt reported. Window 3 stories up, clear. But the SAF wasn't just using rifles. We started seeing RPG trails, white smoke lines arcing through the sky like cursed fireworks. Then came the call. Super 6-1 had been hit. Bird down, bird down. I felt it before I saw it. The ground rushed up to meet her. Super 6-1 smashed into a narrow street, a tangle of metal and smoke. From above, I saw bodies moving, barely. One figure crawling out, Sergeant Dan Knox dragging his leg. Then another, Jim Morales, one arm limp, firing wildly with the other. Our radio lit up like a Christmas tree. Units were split, some pinned down in nearby buildings, others fighting their way to the crash. Command redirected us to hover over the downed bird and provide cover. The perimeter was chaos. Gunfire was constant. Colt leaned out, placing shot after shot. Eli calmly adjusted his M21, each round a message, not today. Then it got worse. RPG struck Super 6-4, a second Black Hawk. It didn't crash, but it was wounded, trailing smoke, barely staying in the air. The militia was using elevation, balconies, rooftops, even minarets. We shifted fire to support the rescue teams. I could see Corporal Benny Rhodes trying to reach Knox and Morales, dragging them back toward a smashed Humvee. But every 20 yards they moved, gunfire pinned them again. SAF was everywhere. It was no longer an operation, it was a siege. Back in the air, our minigun overheated. Colt passed me the belt, his gloves soaked in sweat. Then it jammed. Right then, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. An RPG, spinning upward, headed straight for us. Impact, not direct, grazed the tail, but enough to jolt us hard left. Eli smashed against the bulkhead. I tasted blood. Hold it, our pilot yelled. Just hold her level. Smoke filled the cabin. Alarms blared. We limped away from the crash site, barely 200 yards, and made a hard emergency landing on a rooftop. We scrambled out, set up defensive positions. I dropped behind a crumbling wall, Colt beside me, bleeding from his scalp. Below us, the streets burned. Smoke blackened the sky, screams echoed through the alleys. That was when we got the news. Another bird, Super 6-4, had gone down. This time it was Mike Devlin's crew, the one carrying our friends, Troy Riley and Kyle Boone. They were alive when it crashed. Last radio call, we're surrounded. We knew what that meant, and so did Riley and Boone. They volunteered to insert, cover the downed crew, knowing they'd be outnumbered, outgunned, and likely not coming back. I remember watching from our rooftop. Tiny dots in the sky, their Black Hawk flared, hovered, ropes dropped, 2 figures slid down. Colt lowered his rifle and whispered, "They're going." It hit me like a gut punch. Those were our brothers, going into the fire, for others. I watched until they disappeared into the dust. It was the last time I ever saw them. The rooftop trembled as another explosion rocked the street below. I pressed my back against the concrete wall, hands trembling, not from fear but from adrenaline that had nowhere else to go. Next to me, Colt Barrett spat blood, wiped his face, and asked if I still had a full mag. I didn't answer. I just handed him mine. We were no longer fighting for mission success. We were fighting to survive, to keep each other breathing. Over the radio, we heard frantic chatter. Super 6-4 was completely overrun. Troy Riley and Kyle Boone, our brothers, were still down there. "Requesting QRF," someone barked. "Negative. There was no one left to send." We could only listen. The sound of gunfire, short bursts, then longer ones, then silence. We knew. Colt cursed under his breath and turned away, staring hard at the skyline. "I hope they gave them hell," he muttered. They did. According to later intel, Riley and Boone held that crash site for over 15 minutes against an entire platoon of armed militia. They fought off wave after wave, shielding the downed crew. When their ammo ran out, they went to sidearms. When the sidearms went dry, they drew knives. They died standing, together, protecting others. By then, the streets had turned into killing fields. Our units were cut off in buildings, pinned by gunfire. Wounded were everywhere. No medevac could get in. Air support was maxed out. I kept scanning the alleyways below, marking targets. Every time I lined up a shot, I heard Riley's voice in my head. "Steady, calm. Take the one that's moving. The still ones die later." Then came the call. "Bird inbound. Last window to exfil. You miss it, you're walking out." We lit a smoke grenade, orange, and prayed the pilot could see it. He did. A little bird skimmed the rooftops, nose tilted forward, sliding toward us like a hawk in freefall. 30 seconds, the pilot screamed over comms. We grabbed Colt, half carrying him to the edge. Eli covered with his M21, firing 2 shots that dropped 2 riflemen moving in from the left. We clipped in, descended by rope. The pilot barely hovered, maybe 5 feet off the roof, before we were airborne again. Looking down, the city looked like a vision from hell. Flames licked out of windows, bodies lay scattered in streets and courtyards, and right near Super 6-4's smoldering wreck, I saw them. 2 small shapes, still, side by side. We made it back to the hangar just before dawn. Eli collapsed from exhaustion. Colt passed out mid-sentence. I just sat there, helmet still on, rifle across my lap, trying to slow my breathing. They brought in the wounded by the dozens. One kid came in with a belt tied around his thigh and a screwdriver wedged under it. Turns out he was the gunner from 6-2, hit in the leg and refused to pass out. He made it. Others didn't. We lost 18 Americans that day, dozens wounded. Some would never walk again, some never spoke about what happened, others couldn't stop. But I remember everything. I remember the courage, the sacrifice, the silence after the last shot was fired. And most of all, I remember the last thing Riley said to me before we deployed. "If this goes sideways, just make sure someone tells my mom I didn't flinch." He didn't. We got back to Fort Bragg 3 weeks later. Our uniforms were pressed, boots polished, but something in us had changed. You could see it in our eyes, like the light had dimmed, just enough to notice, just enough that you knew some part of us had stayed behind. They held a ceremony in a chapel that smelled of old wood and wax. 18 flags folded, 18 names read aloud, each followed by a bell that echoed too long in the silence. I sat in the back row, didn't blink, didn't move. I just kept hearing that phrase on repeat. He didn't flinch. We were called heroes, given medals, shaken hands, told to rest. But I didn't want rest, I wanted to earn it. So I trained harder, pushed past the pain, went back downrange, more deployments, more firefights, more loss. But no matter how far I went, Mogadishu followed me, like a shadow stitched to my heels. For years I carried the guilt like body armor, heavy, necessary, invisible to others, but always pressing against my ribs. Until one day I sat down with Riley's mom. She made me tea, asked me to tell her everything. I did, from the first shot, to the last breath, to the look in his eyes when he chose to stay. She didn't cry, she just nodded, then said something I've never forgotten. Thank you for remembering my son as brave, but thank you more for remembering him as kind. That was the moment I stopped running, because I realized their legacy isn't just about how they fought, it's about how they lived. About the jokes told in mess halls, the letters written under red lights, the little acts of humanity in the middle of hell. That's what I carry now. Not the guilt, not the medals, but the memory of their courage and their kindness. Every October 3rd, I lace up my boots and run. Not for time, not for fitness. I run because they can't, and I refuse to forget that. My name is Ryan Harlow, and I survived Mogadishu. But I live for those who didn't. If this story moved you, if it made you feel, reflect, or simply remember, consider subscribing. We bring you true stories of courage, sacrifice, and the moments that define us. Leave a comment below. What does honor mean to you? And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because some stories should never be forgotten. This is Ryan Harlow's voice, but it echoes for all who never came home.